Because they're now 4 games without a win after losing 2-1 at home to Newcastle in the Premier League over the weekend. Dominic Solanke put Spurs in front before they were pegged back by a controversial Anthony Gordon equaliser. And Postecoglou, the Tottenham manager, had one very clear message after the game.
I think on the balance of play, on any balance you want, if all things were equal, we would have won today.
Their first goal, Newcastle's, what was your take on that? Because I don't think there was much happiness on the bench about the manner of it.
As I said, if all things were equal, we would have won today.
Can you expand on that? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, just if all things were equal and balanced, we would have won today.
But what does that mean? Because it's a bit ambiguous.
That just means that things weren't equal and weren't balanced, that's all.
In terms of who you had available, is that what you mean?
If all things were well balanced and equal, and we would have won the game today.
Can I just check, do you mean that officiating areas?
You can check, you can talk about whatever you want. You don't want to have an opinion, you want my opinion. My opinion is that if all things were even and balanced today, we would have won that game.
Well, that's very clear, isn't it? Let's talk to Chris Cowlin, who hosts the Spurs Chat podcast and is a regular discusser with the likes of me about Tottenham Hotspur. He's on the line now. Chris, good evening to you.
Good evening, Nick. How are you?
Yeah, very good to speak to you. I'm sorry we have to talk to you when Spurs fans are going through pain as opposed to anything else, but it is a rather painful time at the moment. Where do you assess where sort of everything is at the moment, given that the recent run, given the injuries, given the uncertainty perhaps surrounding the manager? What's your take on it all?
Well, where do I start? I tell you, I could be all night talking about this. Of course,
we're here for you, Chris. We are here for you. Whenever, take your time.
Spurs are 12th in the Premier League table. I didn't think I'd be saying that in January of this season. But I think Ange Postecoglou needs time. I think he needs patience from the board. Of course, Daniel Levy has been in charge now for 24 years, and it seems like we get rid of managers every 18 months. And I feel like when Harry Kane left the football club, it was a big reset. And I felt like them giving Ange Postecoglou a 4-year deal, this was going to be a long-term project. And I feel like, we're only 18 months into it. I know a lot of people, a lot of the media guys are putting pressure on Ange Postecoglou already, but it's very, very fair to say that recently we've had a lot of injury problems. I think a lot of us could go back and say the transfer window should have been better, and I completely agree with that. The windows do need to be better. We do seem to be signing a lot of players for the future. And I said in the summer that, a couple of key injuries again, because we saw this last season, we could be in trouble because we need experienced players to come in and make a real impact. However, I do think that Spurs gave a really good account of themselves against Newcastle. We started off very well, Dominic Solanke scoring, and then, of course, the Gordon goal with the Joe Linton handball. And then, of course, Isak got the winner. But I thought that we gave a really good account of ourselves. When you look at the amount of issues that we've got or had on and off the pitch, the amount of injuries, the amount of suspensions that we've had since Postecoglou has come through the door, and then, of course, this last week with the sickness bug, it just seems to be, think of the unthinkable, think of the impossible, and it happens to Tottenham Hotspur. We seem to be so unlucky.
What do you make of the argument that you do hear when the likes of Ange Postecoglou talks about injuries, and indeed other people sort of say, look, you've got to give Spurs some leeway given all the injuries, that in the Premier League the Tottenham league position cannot be in the bottom half. It just can't. Managers don't survive. Doesn't matter if you've got 100 injuries. It just doesn't happen that Spurs managers are allowed to see their team languishing in the bottom half of the Premier League table. Every time that happens, the manager leaves. And do you think that's fair, or do you think that sometimes life is just unfair?
Well, I think, Nick, the depth, that is the issue. That is the issue here. And I think a lot of Spurs fans can see that. The depth just isn't there. The depth just isn't good enough. We played Sergio Reguilon in the second half. It looked like he was going to go in so many transfer windows, particularly this one as well. Brandon Austin coming in for his Premier League debut. Now, we are, and I'm going to use the same words that Ange Postecoglou has used, we are at bare bones. The squad depth is not good enough. And I think when you lose someone like Harry Kane, and it's fair to say as well, we had a huge clear out in the last couple of windows. Full credit to the club. Some of these players weren't good enough. Some of these players weren't going to play under Postecoglou. But essentially, you got rid of a lot of experienced players, and then we brought in a lot of youngsters who, I might add, have done extremely well. But I think in this Premier League squad, a size like Tottenham Hotspur, a football club like Spurs, they need experienced players. And I think that when you look at the way that Ange Postecoglou plays, when it really clicks, wow, it is super entertaining football, and the Spurs fans absolutely love it. Of course, as I said at the start, we don't want to be sitting in 12th. We don't want to be having 10 defeats in the Premier League this season so far at this halfway point. It's difficult to take, but I think that when you are going through such a major rebuild, I think that you are going to go through tough times like this. But it is fair to say, and I know a lot of fans say and a lot of managers say, oh yeah, injuries, but Spurs have had so many injuries, more than any other Premier League club this season. And as I said, the squad depth just isn't good enough. And the next couple of transfer windows are absolutely key.
Chris, stay there a second. Jamal Fifield's alongside me. You're I think it's fair to say, not a Spurs fan. What do you have? But you are a footballer, and you've been injured, and you've been in a team probably that's had loads of injuries. Do you have sympathy for the situation that Ange Postecoglou and his injury-riven squad? Do you have sympathy with that position that they have?
It is unfortunate that they had so many injuries, especially around them at the same time. But I do feel as though finding the right balance between the squad depth and the squad quality is really important. Now, you lose a proven goal scorer in Harry Kane, probably one of the best strikers in the world, but then you do bring in Dom Solanke. So I do wonder what the measure of success would be for this Spurs squad to see out the rest of the season, really.
And would you therefore go and spend big money now? And because we'll talk to Chris about this in a second, but if you go to a club now and say, we want your player, and you're Tottenham, everyone's going to say, well, you've sold Harry Kane, there's money in the bank, we know you'll play top dollar because we know about the Solanke money. You're kind of almost on a losing wicket already, but nevertheless, have they got to do it because that payoff between the numbers and quality at the moment doesn't work for them?
Well, this is the issue. We all know Tottenham do have money, but we also know that they've got a person in Levy that is a hard bargainer. He doesn't just spend the money willy-nilly. So it's kind of like, where do you find that player? And they need quite a lot of players. I don't think they've replaced Hugo Lloris. I don't feel as though they've been able to match his impact throughout that squad. I think they need
as
a
leader,
spine,
maybe
as a leader in the change room. I think a true spine of a squad. You look at the players that came through. Sol Campbell, with it looking so far back, they haven't had a centre half in that mould apart from Ledley King, but again, he was injury prone, so it's kind of hard to find the solution for that Tottenham team. It's going to take a lot of money and a lot of time, but it's going to be a tough one for sure. Just
to bring Chris Cowlin back in, Chris, I didn't read this morning that there are some tickets available for the Liverpool game. Have I read that right? And is that Spurs fans kind of voting with their feet almost?
I don't think it's that. I think that a lot of people see the injuries that we've got at the moment, and Liverpool are absolutely flying. They've lost one game all season, so it's going to be a very, very tough game. But, going back to talking about the squad and the transfer window, it is going to take time. And a lot of fans don't like to hear that time and patience quote again, because we feel like we've been, very patient under certain different managers. But I think when you've got going through this rebuild, and you've got to give the manager the time and the patience, not necessarily the football club or the board. The manager needs the time and the patience. And, going back to the point about spending huge money, I don't necessarily think that it is about spending huge money, because when you look at some of the players that we've brought in and spent big money on, they haven't worked out. It's not all about money sometimes. It's about the right recruitment. And Johan Lange, who's come in at Spurs now, it's all about the data. And he's now certainly going after players through data. So that's going to be interesting to see whether that is successful going forward. But I just think it is going to take time. It is going to take patience. And I just don't see what we would get by replacing Ange Postecoglou, because there's a lot of people at the moment, a lot of Spurs fans feeling like we should be changing the manager yet again. I just don't feel like we would get any benefits from that right now.
Great talking to you, Chris, and thank you for coming on to talk about a painful subject as well. Chris Cowlin from the Spurs Chat podcast here on BBC Radio London. We have dwelt on Tottenham's travails. We will, in a few moments' time, dwell on West Ham's difficulties, and there are plenty of those around at the moment. You're listening to BBC Radio London. It's 6:30, and here are the news headlines with Will Schindler.